Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about muscular system. Our objectives for today is to distinguish between the three types of muscle tissue, describe the structure of skeletal muscle fibers, explain how skeletal muscle contracts, describe how muscle move the bone, and finally explain some problems with the muscle, how it becomes fatigued. Now let's watch a short movie about muscular system in a few minutes, then we will get back and continue our presentation.
The muscular system is made up of over 600 muscles. While we won't be covering all 600 individual muscles in this overview video, we will be discussing the main functions of the muscular system, the 5 major properties, the 5 types of muscle movements, 3 types of muscles, and how all of this works together to make up what we know as the muscular system. The primary purpose for the muscular system is to provide movement for the body. Now, these muscles receive their ability to move through the nervous system. There are 5 major properties to the muscular system. Number 1, muscles are excitable or irritable. This means that they are capable of receiving stimulation and responding to stimulation from the nerves. 2, they are contractible. After receiving stimulation, they are capable of contracting or shortening. Being extensible means a muscle can be stretched without damage by the application of force. With elasticity, a muscle is able to return to its original resting shape and length after being extended or contracted. The muscular system is adaptable in that it can be changed in response to how it is used. For example, a muscle will enlarge or undergo hypertrophy with increased work. But on the other hand, it can go into atrophy or waste away if deprived of work. Now, let's look at the 5 types of muscle movements. Number 1, adduction. Adduction is the moving of a body part toward the midline of the body. Abduction is moving a body part away from the body. Flexion means bending a joint to decrease the angle between 2 bones or 2 body parts. Extension is straightening and extending of the joint to increase the angle between 2 bones or body parts. And lastly, rotation involves moving a body part around an axis. The muscular system is divided into 3 main types of muscles, and each of these types can be moved by one of 2 ways, either voluntary or involuntary. The cardiac muscle is an involuntary muscle, meaning it operates without any conscious control. These muscles form the walls of the heart and contracts to circulate the blood. The visceral or smooth muscles are also considered involuntary. These muscles are found in organs or organ systems such as the digestive or respiratory system. And the 3rd type of muscle is the skeletal muscle. These are what we typically think of when talking about muscles. These muscles attach to the skeleton and provide the skeleton with the ability to move. The skeletal muscles are classified as voluntary. This is because we have to make a conscious effort or decision to make them move. Although muscles obviously make up the muscle system, there are still some supportive structures that we need to look at that are also a necessary part of the system. Tendons and fascia are important supportive structures for the skeletal muscles. Simply put, tendons are what attach a muscle to a bone, and fascia connects muscles to other muscles. Tendons and fascia work together with muscles which create the muscular system necessary for movement. While not technically part of the same system, the nervous system is intrinsically connected to the muscular system of the body. It is essential to the voluntary skeletal muscles. If the communication from the nervous system is severed from the skeletal muscles will not be able to produce movement for the body. The body is now in a state of paralysis. This is known as quadriplegia. The only organ that is not directly dependent upon the nervous system is the cardiac or heart muscle. Now there is so much more to discuss about the muscular system, but that's as far as we'll go in this introductory video. After watching this video, you should at least have a basic understanding of what makes up the muscular system, its properties, and functions.
As we saw in the movie, we saw a lot of information, so let's reorder that in our notes. We knew that there are three types of the muscles. Let's see what are they. Now, first, the muscle is an organ that contracts in coordinated fashion and includes muscle tissue, blood vessels, nerves, and connective tissues. Their ability to contract and relax is not only enable the body to move, but also provide the force that pushes substances such as blood and food throughout your body. The human body has three types of muscles: skeletal, smooth, and cardiac muscular tissue. Now, skeletal muscles consciously control the moving part of the body and are often referred to as voluntary muscles. Skeletal muscles are made up of muscle fiber. The muscle fiber actually consists of multinucleated elongated cells with light and dark strips or stripes. These strips are called striations. Now, if we want to take more details, the muscle fibers are grouped into bundles called fasciculus. Now, that are bound together by connective tissue to form a muscle. The connective tissue in skeletal muscle cells can unite to form tendons. Now, the smooth muscles are spindle-shaped, have a single nucleus, and interlace to form sheets. Now, smooth muscle lacks striations, and the connective tissue that surround it cannot form tendons. So the tendons is only with the skeletal muscle. The smooth muscle form the walls of the stomach, intestine, blood vessels, and other internal organs. Because most of its movement cannot be consciously controlled, smooth muscle is referred to as involuntary muscle, while the skeletal muscle is voluntary muscle. The last type is the cardiac muscle, which makes up the walls of the heart, and it's only found there, by the way. The cardiac muscle shares some characteristic with both skeletal muscle and smooth muscle. As with the skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle tissue is striated. As with the smooth muscle, it's involuntary, and each cell has one nucleus. Look at this picture. We have three types of muscle tissue, like the skeletal muscle in your biceps, like your cardiac muscle in the heart, and the smooth muscle in the intestine. Okay, let's talk about the muscular system structure or the muscle structure. The skeletal muscle fiber is single multinucleated muscle cell. Although muscle fiber make up most of the muscle tissue, a large amount of connective tissue, blood vessel, and nerve also are present. Of course, we need blood for like nutrition, supplies, and get rid of waste. We need connective tissues to connect these muscles together. Also we need nerves to control these motions. I'm not talking about voluntary or non-voluntary. I'm talking about the brain control or spinal cord control. Now, the connective tissues covers and supports each muscle fiber and reinforce the muscle as a whole. Each skeletal muscle fiber has a nerve ending that controls its activity. Muscle produce large amount of metabolic waste that must be removed through veins. So first we need the nerves to control or send and receive orders and messages to the muscle. Now metabolism produce waste. It is removed by the circular system through the veins. The skeletal muscle fiber contains bundles of structures called myofibril. This myofibril is a thread-like structure that contains two types of proteins. Here we are going to talk about how the contraction of the muscle. Now, each myofibril is made up of two types of proteins, filaments, thick ones and thin ones. The thick filaments are mostly made of the protein myosin, which is also most abundant protein in muscle tissue. The thin filaments are made of protein called actin, which is the protein that function in the contraction and relaxation of muscles. Since action filaments are the main protein in contraction and relaxation, actin filaments are anchored at their endpoints and create a structure called the Z line. The region from the one Z line to the next is called sarcomere. This sarcomere unit is basic unit of the contraction for skeletal and cardiac muscle. Take a look at this picture. You'll see this is one example of the muscle, how it is structured here. If you notice, these are the Z lines. This is the sarcomere. Inside we have the myofibril, we have the myosin and the actin. Now, when a nerve impulse simulates a muscle to contract, the myosin filaments heads attached to the points on the actin filaments. We'll watch this in a few minutes in a video. The myosin heads then bend inward, pulling the actin with them. The myosin heads then let the actin go, bend back to their original position, attach to a new position on the actin, and pull again. The actin the action just described shortens the sarcomeres, and when all sarcomeres of a muscle fiber are shortened, the muscle fiber and thus the muscle, of course, contract. Muscle contraction requires energy which is applied by ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Because myosin heads must attach and deattach a number of times during a single muscle contraction, muscle cell must have continuous supply of ATP. This means it has a lot of mitochondrial content. Now, if we take a look at this picture, it summarizes how it contracts like steps. This is the myofibril, which made up of sarcomeres. Each sarcomere contains the myosin and the actin, which are bounded by the Z lines. The first one, the sarcomere, is relaxed. We'll see these actin are away from each other. When it contracts, the actin will slide on the myosin using the ATP, which will make it contract. Contraction is complete when they are here. Now let's see a short movie showing the muscle contraction mechanism. After the movie, we'll continue.
You use muscles every day to do activities. This woman is using muscles to breathe, circulate blood, and move her hand to take notes. Your cardiac and smooth muscle tissues are involuntary. You do not consciously control their actions. Skeletal muscle works under voluntary control. Skeletal muscles are composed of bundles of muscle fibers. Muscle fibers are long cylindrical cells containing several nuclei. Muscles will contract or relax when they receive signals from the nervous system. A neuromuscular junction is the site of the signal exchange. This is where the synaptic bulb of an axon terminal and muscle fiber connect. Muscle fibers are composed of many myofibrils. A myofibril contains contractile units called sarcomeres. Sarcomeres run adjacent to one another down the length of the myofibril. Each sarcomere consists of alternating thick and thin protein filaments, giving skeletal muscle its striated appearance. The muscle contracts when these filaments slide past each other. The thick filaments are myosin, which are anchored at the center of the sarcomere, called the M line. The thin filaments are composed of the protein actin, which are anchored to the Z lines on the outer edges of the sarcomere. Because the actin filaments are anchored to the Z lines, the sarcomere shortens from both sides when actin filaments slide along the myosin filaments. Although the action between the filaments is described as sliding, the myosin filament actually pulls the actin along its length. The cross bridges of the myosin filaments attach to the actin filaments and exert force on them to move. This action is known as the sliding filament mechanism of muscle contraction. In this model, the sarcomeres shorten without the thick or thin filaments changing in length. A contraction begins when a bound ATP is hydrolyzed to ADP and inorganic phosphate. This causes the myosin head to extend and can attach to a binding site on actin, forming a cross bridge. An action called the power stroke is triggered, allowing myosin to pull the actin filament toward the M line, thereby shortening the sarcomere. ADP and inorganic phosphate are released during the power stroke. The myosin remains attached to actin until a new molecule of ATP binds, freeing the myosin to either go through another cycle of binding and more contraction or remain unattached to allow the muscle to relax. Muscle contractions are controlled by the actions of calcium. The thin actin filaments are associated with regulatory proteins called troponin and tropomyosin. When a muscle is relaxed, tropomyosin blocks the cross-bridge binding sites on actin. When calcium ion levels are high enough and ATP is present, calcium ions bind to the troponin, which displaces tropomyosin, exposing the myosin binding sites on actin. This allows myosin to attach to a binding site on actin, forming a cross bridge. Calcium ions are stored in the sarcoplasmic reticulum and are released in response to signals from the nervous system to contract. Neurotransmitter molecules are released from a neuron and bind to receptors, which depolarizes the membrane of the muscle fiber. The electrical impulse travels down the T-tubules and opens calcium stores. Calcium ions flow to the myofibrils, where they trigger a muscle contraction. As the actin and myosin slide along each other, the entire sarcomere shortens as the Z lines draw closer to the M line. As the sarcomeres in myofibrils contract, the entire muscle fiber will shorten. When muscle fibers contract in unison, a muscle can produce enough force to move the body, allowing you to take notes.
Okay, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the video. So, muscle contraction is in all or none response. Either the fiber contract or they remain relaxed. So there is no one sarcomere that will contract by itself. Either all of them or none of them. The force of muscle contraction is determined by the number of muscle fibers that are stimulated. As more fibers are activated, the force of the contraction increases. 5. Muscles are attached to the outer membrane of the bone. We are talking here about the skeletal muscle. The periosteum, it's the part where the muscle is attached to, either directly or by tough fibrous cord of connective tissues called tendons. The point where the muscle attached to the stationary bone is called the origin, while the point where the muscle attached to the moving bone is called insertion. Most skeletal muscles are arranged in opposing pairs, and muscles move bones by pulling them. The muscle that bends a joint is called a flexor. A muscle that straightens a joint is also an extensor. In order for smooth movement, one muscle in pair must contract while the opposite muscle is relaxed. Look at this picture. If we talk about the biceps and the triceps, by the way, biceps because it has two heads, triceps has 3 heads. Anyway, in this situation, when you are raising up your arm up, actually the biceps will be the flexor, while the triceps will be the extensor. When you pull back your hand or put down your hand or arm, actually it's the opposite. The triceps will be the extensor and the triceps will be the flexor. So they are opposing to each other. This is the biceps contraction, this is the triceps contraction. Now, last but not least, the problems with muscles, the muscle fatigue. Now, muscle cells store glycogen, which provides muscle with energy because the glycogen is a carbohydrate and this one will be broken down into glucose and it will go through the energy production. During prolonged and vigorous extension and when glucose has been used up, fat muscles are utilized for energy. So once the glucose finish up, it will start to use the fat molecules. When energy availability fails to keep pace with its use, muscle fatigue sets in. Muscle fatigue is the physiological inability of muscle to contract and is a result of relative depletion of ATP. Depletion of ATP results by overusing your muscle, doing a lot of work without getting good supplies of energy. Oxygen debt. When the level of oxygen coming into the body is not enough to meet the demands of energy production, an oxygen debt is established. And as we remember, oxygen is very important for cellular respiration, which produces energy in the mitochondria. Oxygen debt is the extra amount of oxygen that must be taken in by the body to replenish the muscle's oxygen reserves and to allow for the breakdown of lactic acid within the muscle. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. See you next lesson.